Romans chapter 12, if you would turn there, please. Well, it wasn't really a lie, I didn't mean it. So if you don't mean it, is it a lie still? That's tricky. Is that a loophole? Are you allowed to lie if you don't mean it? No one has any convictions on lying and deceit? Sorry? It could be. Is it foolish jesting? Maybe. Jesting's fine. I don't mind jesting. Foolish jesting is a different matter. Okay, let's get to something a little more serious and concrete. Romans chapter 12, I'd like to read the first 2 verses of Romans 12. And just as a heads up, I appreciate someone speaking up. It's better than silence. But it'd be really great if the guys spoke up. That would just be special, wouldn't it? I think even the ladies might appreciate it if the guys spoke up. Now, Romans 12, 1 and 2 are so familiar you may have memorised them even if you did not intend to memorise them, because they come up again and again and again, and for good reason, I think. So I'd like to read the verses and we'll pray, make some comments, but I want to target one part of the 2 verses chiefly. So Romans 12, 1 and 2, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Father in heaven, we come before you not in haste. We trust we hope we're prayed up. But we stand in need of your help, dear Father, every day, but certainly here and now. Pray that you would aid the ministry of your word, help it to be what it needs to be, help it to honour Christ, to uplift the soul, to point us in the direction which we need this evening. So we ask your blessing in Christ's name. Amen. I get asked from time to time, how do I find a message? And the simple answer is I put myself in the front pew and I imagine what I need to have preached to me. And that's largely how I got my messages. I just preach to my need. So if none of you need this tonight, that's because I needed it. You're welcome to go to sleep. Hopefully not. Romans 12, 1 and 2, very common text and key verses, often at the beginning of a discipleship. Someone has been entrusted with a young believer, someone who has freshly trusted Christ as Saviour, and that's very often the first place that things will begin, and for good reason. Take them there and try and establish very early on some of the most core and practical truths of the Christian life. Giving ourselves to him, changing from what we were to what we should be, having even our mindset altered from the world around us to what it should be. In our day, it's as needful as ever, and maybe more so, for one key reason, and that would be social media. Aside from what we do with social media morally, we have this issue in our day is that we are bombarded with more information every minute than has ever taken place in human history. There's never been so much information pumped into our minds as we scroll. 5 minutes of scrolling and you've probably indulged in more indoctrination than would normally take place in an entire year. It's just a bombardment. There's not even certainty yet as to whether our minds are capable of processing the sheer volume of information that's being pumped in. So we're becoming information dumps. And then whether we can process all that information is another issue entirely. So without moving any further, let me just say on that point, you need to be selective with what gets dumped in your brain. Just from the perspective of volume, let alone from the perspective of morality. But we're called upon to do a number of things here, right? If we look at verse 2, be not conformed to this world. That's a great statement. Certainly needs a great deal of study, great research and discussion. It should be something you discuss amongst yourselves. What does it mean to not be conformed to this world? I mean, they wear clothes, we wear clothes. So far we're just alike. Well, actually that's not strictly true. We wear clothes, they do not always wear clothes. But you get the idea. They do a lot of things, we might do similar things to what they do, but clearly something more than that is being targeted. If you know your scriptures, you know that there is a spirit in this world, and that spirit has an agenda and is moving things in that direction. That we should not be a part of. We should not be conformed to that. But what we should be is transformed. That's a great word, it's a word of power, where our life is shifted, changed fundamentally and at our core from what it was and what it could have been to what it can be. Even if you've been raised, praise God if you have, in a Christian home, even the Christian home cannot remove the fact that you were born with a sin nature. And so there is in you the potential for the vilest and filthy acts. Don't imagine it, but whatever man could imagine, it's a seed in every Christian's heart, which we are born with. So we still, no matter what your upbringing or how good or solid your upbringing was, you still need the transformative power of Christ to keep you from being what evil thing you could be and change you into what great thing you could be. So not conformed, transformed by the renewing of your mind, because the process starts there. And the goal being to prove you're a great person? No. To prove the will of God. In other words, to prove God's greatness, not our own. Now I hope each one of you will be great Christians, but that's not the goal in itself. The goal is to prove his greatness. That's what people need to see. Whether or not they see you as better makes no difference at all. But if they can see Christ better, that makes the difference perhaps to someone's eternity. But if we go back to verse 1, that's where I want to focus. That's where the start is, where he uses that phrase, living sacrifice. I appreciated the last two hymns that were selected in part because they go back to my youth. I was able to recall much like this night where we met as young adults, teenagers from 16 to 19 or whatever it was. And almost every week we sang about those sorts of things and sung those hymns. So they're very significant to me just for that memory's sake. But their truths are great. Living sacrifice we are called upon to be. Now think about it. Before we move on any further, think what was a sacrifice? All through history, what was a sacrifice? It was a dead thing offered to God. It was a blood thing, correct? All the sacrifices from the fall of man, when Adam and Eve first rebelled, God offered up a sacrifice that there prefigured the work of Christ. Every sacrifice from then to the time of Romans was a blood offering to God. Before Christ, to picture the work of Christ. When Christ came to be the thing we needed to atone for all the vile things we've thought and done. Now, if you're here tonight and you've never known what Christ can do in your heart, you've no idea what a wonderful work that is when a person bows the knee and says, Lord, forgive me and save me. His transformation of that life, the covering of the sin and the changing of the life from being enslaved to sin to enslaved to Christ is the most glorious thing that can ever happen in a man or a woman's life. But up until that point, as we said, all the sacrifices have been blood, 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 blood. But now, in a complete shift, he says, now I want you to offer your life, not a blood sacrifice. We're not called to sacrifice humans. We're not called to sacrifice animals. We're called to give ourselves as a sacrifice, thinking of those sacrifices. But he says, I want you to do it in a matter that is a living offering. The product here, the end product here, is not meant to be a dead body, but a living body, and therefore, what? What's the purpose of giving a living body to God, to Christ? Gentlemen, the ladies are waiting. I'll just wait. I'll just sit here for a bit. Sorry? Very good. That was easy, wasn't it? There you go, guys. Know how easy it is to answer one of my questions. I'm not a deep theologian. The purpose of giving the living sacrifice is so that it is usable at the end. That's the idea, correct? Very simple. I beseech you by the mercies of God. So he appeals back, read the previous chapters, very simply, to the mercy of God through Christ. That work should be in our minds so great, so noble, so profound that every time we think of it, we can't help but desire to give something in return. That's what it should be to us, correct? So you think about Christ, he gave up as the living eternal God who had never experienced death, never needed to experience death, took a human form for the purpose of experiencing the one thing God had never experienced, death, so that you could be redeemed. The thought of that then should be in your mind, what do I need to give back? What do I need to return to you? I beseech you, that's the strength and the emotion of that word. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present yourselves a living sacrifice, an entire giving over of ourselves to Christ. So think of this. We know in passages such as John 7:24, our Lord calls upon us to not judge things superficially, but to judge things righteously. That is, from the outside, it's very easy to misunderstand or misread or miscomprehend what's going on, and so we can judge things superficially. We're called upon to judge righteous judgments. But with that in mind, we're still called upon to do something here that is the only concrete proof of God doing anything in your heart. Anyone can say, Christ owns me. And what's the proof of that? You've probably said it. Someone's asked you, are you a Christian? Yes. By that you're claiming to be his. But what's the proof of that? The only concrete proof, thank you, there was an attempt at a guy to answer a question and I beat him to it. The only concrete proof that there is something in your heart that's different is that there is something in your life which is different. There's no other possibility. You can claim all you want. You can say, yeah, but I mean it. I don't care. Really, it's between you and God. It's not me. You can claim it all you want, but if there is no change in the life, then what you're claiming in the heart is not real. It's fake. It's a pretense. It's an attempt by you to either impress somebody or to get them off the trail. You know what I mean, don't you? You don't want to talk to them. You don't want to be open with them. You don't want to have the deep discussion that is likely to follow. So you give the answer that will get them off the scent. Yeah, I gave myself to the Lord. I'm good, thanks. But the only concrete proof of that is those two words, living sacrifice. That's the only proof. You go anywhere you like in the Christian life, and it comes back to those two words. Are you a living sacrifice? God has called upon you to give something that is a concrete evidence that something has in fact taken place inside, and it's the only thing then he can use. He can't use a heart that says that it's his, but holds back the body. Well, that's useless. It's of no value. God can't do anything with that until he has the arms, legs, face, lips, eyes, the whole thing. Think back a few thousand years to a man. God spoke to a man. He was, how old was he? About 75 years old. That's about how old Abraham was, correct? When he left his homeland. I think that's how the figures roughly work. So he started late anyway, by our estimation. About 75 years of age. God made some very clear promises to him. He said, I'm going to give you a place and I'm going to give you a people. And then Abraham dutifully, amazingly, left in faith. That's all he had, faith. But what was the proof of his faith? The proof of it was that his body moved location. That's a living sacrifice. He moved his body in response to what God said in evidence of his faith. So Abraham's life became, from that moment, more or less, I say that because he was a human and showed that from time to time, but he still did the one thing that most of us would struggle to do, wouldn't we? If God said, I want you to go somewhere, he'd say, great, where? I'm not telling you. Well, that's difficult. That's all right. You start moving and I'll guide you as you go. That'd be difficult. What do you want me to do, Lord? Hop in an Uber. Hop in the first Uber and just go where he takes you. So you hop in the Uber and you end up at the airport. What do I do here? Just hop on the next plane. Can you imagine what that would be like? Blind. Not only that, God had promised Abraham, I'll give you a place, I'll give you a people. Now at 75 years of age, they didn't have a people yet. It was 25 years, I think. Yes, 25 years. And then he and his wife had their first child of promise. He's 100 and his wife's, let's not talk about the age of the wife. He's 100. Finally, after 25 years, he's beginning to see the hand of God do something in his life. That's amazing. But then it just sort of ambles on, the story ambles on a bit, and then we get to about 25 years later, and God asks of Abraham something else. Who recalls, I'm sure you all do, what God asked Abraham to do? Yes. Now we're told in Hebrews that Abraham believed that God was able to raise Isaac from the dead. But that shorthands what it was like for him, doesn't it? To sacrifice his son. So there's a couple of problems there. It's his son. It's his wife's son. What did his wife think when Abraham came home and said, guess what? God's asked us to sacrifice our son. What do you think his wife's response was? Well, we're told somewhat what a response was. But can you imagine what that discussion would have looked like? So he's got a son. Now his son's 25 years old. That was a dutiful boy. Got to give Isaac credit for about the only thing he did in his life. So he's called upon to sacrifice his son, but even that doesn't do it justice, because 50 years before, God had said to Abraham, I will give you a people. And here he is with the people, and God says, now sacrifice it. Surrender the proof and evidence that I am at fact at work in your life. Now that's a big ask. God's asking Abraham in the strongest possible terms, how simple and strong is your faith, Abraham? I made a promise to you. I have been fulfilling that promise. Now I'm asking you to hand the promise back. Give it over to me. Genesis 17:19, and God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with this seed after him. So Abraham is the clear connection to Abraham's future. In Hebrews 11:17-19, it says, by faith Abraham, when he was tried, and it was a trial, offered up Isaac. And he that had received the promises offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, from whence also he received him in a figure. Can you imagine then, not that it would take this time frame with us, but it could do, you trust God for 50 years and finally something begins to happen that proves that God's at work, and then God says, surrender it. Give it to me. You've prayed and prayed and prayed, and then God brings the prayer to fruition, and then it says, now that I've given you the answer, give it back. You pray and pray and pray. Maybe you've prayed for a husband or for a wife, and you might get to the point where it looks like it's being fulfilled. Yay. And then God says to the guy, give her back to me. Surrender her to me. And vice versa. Brings the man along, the perfect man. Big bank account. No, sorry, let's scrub that. The perfect guy. In the best sense. And you think, this is it. This is what I've longed for, been raised for. And then God says, give him to me. Surrender the whole idea of marriage to me. That'd be a test, wouldn't it? Be a trial, as it was with him. It would be a sacrifice. But it's the only way to concretely show what God is in fact doing in the heart. How else could God prove what was in here in Abraham? How else could the world know it? How else could Abraham know it? How could Abraham know that he was a great man of faith until God says, now take a step of faith? Now there's the proof of it. Can you see? That the living sacrifice is the only concrete proof of whatever it is that God's trying to do within you. Some years ago, my wife and I were in the privileged position to have a fairly large sum of money and then said, give it away. So we did. And then I was relaying it to a brother, and his only response was, well, that was dumb. And it wasn't what I was expecting, okay? That blindsided me. It winded me a little. I sat back and I was expecting, yeah, good on you, mate. That was great. You know, a bit of a pat on the back and fluff up my pride and my ego maybe. Just wasn't expecting, well, that was dumb. It was a test. A concrete proof or evidence or fruit of whatever it is God was trying to do within. From those, we now bring it down to you. So this passage was written so that one day you would read it. And maybe it might be entirely, this is the first time tonight you've read those verses. But chances are you've read it before. But it's now here tonight for you to bring to you the idea of concrete evidence of what you might be claiming God is doing in your life. Where's the proof? As an old saying goes, where's the beef? Where's the evidence? Where's the magic of the moment? Where is the proof that God is at work in your heart if it is not that you are a living sacrifice? Now, we like the living bit, not so much the sacrifice. Living sacrifice. What can God take from you? Well, living sacrifice implies everything. But again, we want it to be concrete, because that's the idea of the passage, is to make the last 11 chapters now concrete. So we need to think now in terms of making it concrete here, tonight, and now. The concrete expression, if any, of what God's doing in your life. Because if there is no concrete expression, nothing's happening. No matter what degree of pretense you might seem happy to show to those that are around you. So let me ask you these questions, and this is where it now comes to you. I just selected some thoughts, some key thoughts, because really we could spend all night, couldn't we? We could get in a big circle and discuss what each one of us, if we were that open, so really, God put my finger on this. That'd be a great discussion. But let me give you something to feed it with first. If Christians are anything, there should be certain things that are core to it. For example, faith. We are called upon to be creatures of faith. So if we make that faith concrete, what are you doing by faith? That is, what are you doing that needs God to fulfill it? What are you endeavouring? We're at the beginning of a year, and properly driven, motivated, intelligent people will begin to think, what should be involved in this year? What should it look like? Well, for you and I, core to that should be faith. Have you got anything in this year, or maybe in the next 10 or 20 years? It might be that you can't put a time frame to it, but what is there in your life that you have to say, well, this is my act of faith, and I'm moving in that direction, even though I have nothing to go by except that God has said move in that direction. That's what happens when a man's first called to preach, for example. A guy like myself would have to look at it and say, I'm not a people person, I'm not a public person, I'm not a speaking person, I'm none of those things. Why should I move in that direction? By faith. It's never so much by faith as when God is all you have, in hopes of seeing whatever it is fulfilled. So Christ died for you. Do you think he died for you so that you could sit around on your glorious posterior and do nothing? Do you think his love was poured out in an actual sacrifice, a gory, vile death? It was the most painful death the Roman mind could conceive. And as far as any records go, no one ever survived a full crucifixion. And he did that because he loved you. He did that to atone for your sin. He did that to bring God and life to your life. So now that he asks you, it might be that you already have something in your mind, but it might be that you have to be honest and say, I have no faith step in my near future. Well, tonight will be a good night to ask God to give you a faith step. Something concrete. Because until it's concrete, it's not real. It's pretense. We're called to be creatures of faith. Here's something else we're called to be. We're called to be creatures of holiness. Now that's a topic that could be meted out, discussed, chewed over, mulled for years in order to unfold it all. But at the end of the day, you're called to be a holy being. That is, chiefly, entirely given. So what could you look at your life and honestly say, I have actually held that back? I'm not holy because I've actually held that back. I do what I want there. I mean, you don't have to be honest with me, but you have to be honest with God because he knows anyway. In what way can you honestly say, in that part of my life, I am not holy, which means you're not holy? We're called to be creatures of faith, creatures of holiness. We're called to be creatures of love. Love is meant to be a hallmark of the saint. It's meant to be the one defining mark by which anyone knows that we are the disciples of Christ, because we have a unique and distinctly Christ-like love about us. So who or whom, whichever is the appropriate English, let's go with whom. Whom do you love that you'd have to say, without Christ, I cannot love them? Because that would be a step of faith, wouldn't it? Because we all have people that we know that we'd have to admit, I don't love them. They may have done something horrible to you, which is usually the case, and yet you are called upon to love them. It doesn't mean you have to ignore the wrong that they're doing, but you do still have to love them. That would be a living sacrifice for you, wouldn't it? To live your life ignoring the harm that they've done you and loving them in spite of it. That would be a sacrifice for us. It would be for me, it has been. To love someone whom I by nature do not wish to. But by the command of Christ, I'm compelled to. And it's not, in some ways it's not hard, because I only have to look at myself at Christ and think, well, he loved me at my worst. It's the least I can do to love someone else at their worst. That would be a sacrifice for you. To pick one person, whether or not you're in the position to actually do anything, but it would be a concrete expression of what God's doing in you. We're called to be creatures of obedience. And obedience is never so full as when it is unwilling. It's just easy to do the easy things. That's a no-brainer. But when you know what God says in his word, which might be why some people don't bother reading it, but when you know what he says there, and then you think, oh man, now I've got to do it. Maybe I should just stop reading it. Obedience. It's concrete. It's a concrete expression of what you're claiming God is doing within you. In what way can you say in the last 5 years, let's say, because some of you are quite young, you might not remember more than 5 years back. In what way in the last 5 years could you say you obeyed God, but it was not the easiest thing you ever did? And maybe looking then, projecting forward, in what way could you say in the next 5 to 10 or 15 years, you know you're going to have to obey in some way and it's not going to be easy. But it's the only concrete measure of what God's doing in the life. If you will disobey, you are not a living sacrifice. As simple as it can be put. After obedience, we could add the scriptures. These are not in any particular order, by the way. It's not first to last. It's just a list. The scriptures, this is what we're meant to be people of. Christians are often accused of being people of the book. Sometimes we're accused of worshipping the book, which we know is not true, but such is the devotion that that's what people think. Shouldn't it be that your devotion to this book is so intense that people think you worship the book instead of the God who wrote it? It's a concrete expression of whether or not you are a living sacrifice, whether or not you will give yourself to this book, which means you have to open it and read it and think about it and then, God forbid, apply it. We are called to be people of prayer. These are looking at the simplest things without getting into anything too involved. People of prayer. You know, that prayer is costly. It takes time which we consider valuable, but then the investing of that time shows the value of the thing we're investing in. If a man loves a woman, then he invests in time in her. The giving of that time shows the value of her and vice versa. But how much more God? The investment of time shows the value we place in him. That is a living sacrifice when we make the time to actually pray. And finally, as far as this list is concerned, one thing significantly left off it so far: service. We're called to serve. We're called to serve Christ, who died for us. We're called to serve each other. We're called, to some extent, to serve the unregenerate around us. We're called to serve. But it might be that the only service or the nearest you have in offering of service is that you turn up occasionally, which is not really service at all. It's more of a nod. I'm a Christian because I went to church last month. No, if you're a Christian, it's because you're a living sacrifice, which might require more than you presently surrender. That means then, you know, if, say, you were used to, which we do, we get used to things, you're used to skipping this meeting because I want to do that. Well, you can do that. You're free to do that. God is not necessarily going to strike you dead on the spot, but you're showing where your values are and you're showing whether or not you're a living sacrifice. Because the first time, okay, we think, oh, I've got to give up this to do that. Well, I'll give it up. But, you know, with practice, we can delight in the thing that we take up. But more concretely, what service to Christ are you planning for the next, well, now it's only 10 months left, really, or 10 and a half months, right? So it's racing away. You may already have plans. Do any of those plans involve what you know you can or should do for Jesus Christ? We're not all called to preach. Just as well, or we'd all be up here and there'd be no one down there. That's very poorly expressed. But everyone has something. You only have to look through the rest of chapter 12 to see the spiritual gifts that are themselves reflective of the fact that everyone has a spot. Everyone has something they can do if they're willing. Now there's the key. Are you willing to offer a concrete act of service to Jesus Christ? Because without a concrete expression of whatever's going on within, there is clearly then nothing going on within. Just pretense. Formality. Something to impress someone or something to get people off the scent so that they'll leave you alone. But wouldn't it be more satisfying if you just served Christ and then didn't care about the rest? Wouldn't that be more satisfying if it didn't matter if they picked up your scent, because you'd say, yeah, come along, please, join me? Wouldn't it be good if they asked you and then you actually had something you could say? Can you catch even a glimmer, a glimpse of how satisfying it would be to say to someone when they say, what are you doing? Say, well, you know, this week I did such and such. That doesn't rule out, doesn't mean that nothing else in life is a service, that doesn't mean that a man can't work and that his work can't be a form of service to Christ. But it does mean that we have our mind focused on the concrete expression of what he is doing within. And that if you have a job and if you're going to claim that that is service for Christ, it better actually be the fruit of what he is doing within you. Or then it's just another pretense again. So Abraham was asked to give up. Not only the dearest thing to him, not only the dearest thing to his wife, but the one thing that was showing that God was at work in his life. God said, give it up and see what I can do in its place. And so Romans 12, following that great example of the man of faith in Abraham, is calling upon you to give it up. To give your life a living sacrifice. And see what fruit he can begin to project through you when you give him permission and right and freedom to work within you. That is all. Thank you.